My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how I brought down a CEO who tried to steal my life's work. At 35, I'd spent 12 years building payment systems and crunching big data for some of the most demanding companies in fintech. I thought I'd seen it all: the politics, the backstabbing, the credit stealing, but nothing prepared me for what happened at Verilia Systems. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when I walked into the gleaming offices of Verilia Systems in downtown Dunwich, Nevada. The startup occupied the entire 14th floor of a glass tower, its open-plan workspace buzzing with the energy of young engineers convinced they were about to change the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the desert city, and the reception area featured that particular blend of exposed brick and polished concrete that screamed, "We're disrupting traditional finance." I'd been recruited aggressively by their head of engineering, Marcus Webb, who'd worked with me years earlier at a payments processor. "Sarah, we need someone who actually understands transaction architecture," he'd said over coffee. "Not just another developer who can string together APIs. We're building something revolutionary here, a complete reimagining of how digital wallets interact with financial institutions." The vision was compelling. Verilia Systems wanted to create a payment platform that would make current digital wallets look like stone tablets: real-time processing, zero latency, military-grade security, and most importantly, a user experience so seamless that paying for coffee would be as natural as breathing. They called it FlowPay, though at that point it was just a concept sketched on whiteboards and buried in pitch decks. My first week was a whirlwind of meetings, code-base reviews, and architecture sessions. The engineering team was small but talented: 8 developers, 2 QA engineers, and Marcus overseeing everything. What struck me immediately was how much potential the company had, and how little actual progress had been made on the core technology. They had a beautiful UI, sure, and some basic payment flows, but the back end was a disaster waiting to happen. No proper encryption layers, no redundancy, and certainly no capability to handle the kind of transaction volume they were promising investors. That's when I met Brandon Hughes. He swept into the engineering floor on my 4th day, all designer stubble and perfectly distressed jeans, radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from never having your code fail in production. At 28, Brandon had already sold 2 startups, though if you dug deeper, you'd find both were acqui-hires where the technology was scrapped and only the user base had any value. Still, in the startup world, exits were exits, and Brandon wore his track record like armor. "You must be Sarah," he said, extending a hand with a grip that tried too hard to be firm. "Marcus has been singing your praises, says you're going to solve all our scaling problems." I should have paid attention to the way he said "our," like he was already taking credit for work I hadn't even started yet, but I was focused on the technical challenges ahead, excited by the prospect of building something from the ground up with seemingly unlimited resources and minimal legacy constraints. "I'm looking forward to diving in," I replied. "From what I've seen, you've got strong concepts here. The execution is going to be the interesting part." Brandon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Execution is everything in startups. That's why we hired you to help us execute my vision for revolutionizing payments." His vision, I let it slide, chalking it up to typical CEO bravado. After all, every founder thinks their startup is their baby. I had no idea how literally Brandon would take that concept. The first few months were actually enjoyable. I threw myself into architecting FlowPay with the kind of passion that only comes from solving genuinely difficult problems. The core challenge was creating a payment processing system that could handle millions of microtransactions simultaneously while maintaining bank-level security and regulatory compliance. Current solutions relied on batch processing and settlement delays. We needed something that could move money as quickly as sending a text message. I started with the fundamental architecture, designing a distributed system that could scale horizontally across multiple data centers. The key innovation was in how we handled transaction validation. Instead of the traditional approach of checking each transaction sequentially, I developed an algorithm that could process multiple transactions in parallel while still maintaining ACID compliance. It was like solving a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece affected every other piece. But the end result was beautiful, a payment system that could handle 10,000 transactions per second with latency under 50 milliseconds. The security architecture was even more complex. I designed a three-tier system that went beyond anything currently in production. The first layer used dynamic encryption keys that rotated every transaction, making it virtually impossible for attackers to intercept useful data. The second layer implemented biometric authentication that could distinguish between real users and sophisticated spoofing attempts using machine learning models I'd trained on millions of data points. The third layer was my proudest achievement, an AI-powered fraud detection system that could identify suspicious patterns in real time without slowing down legitimate transactions. Marcus was ecstatic. "Sarah, this is incredible. Do you realize what you've built here? This isn't just an improvement on existing systems, it's a complete paradigm shift." We'd work late into the evenings, Marcus and I, debugging edge cases and optimizing performance. The rest of the engineering team gradually got pulled into the project as the scope became clear. There was Dimitri, a database expert who helped me design the distributed ledger system, Priya, who built the API layer that would allow third-party integrations, James, who stress-tested everything we built until it broke, then helped us make it unbreakable. Brandon would occasionally sweep through the engineering floor, usually with potential investors or board members in tow. He'd gesture at the monitors, showing our real-time metrics, explain concepts he half understood, and generally play the part of the visionary founder. At first, it was merely annoying. He'd sometimes get technical details wrong, and I'd have to gently correct him later. "Actually, Brandon, the encryption isn't blockchain-based. It's a proprietary algorithm that's much faster and more energy efficient." He'd wave off these corrections with a laugh. Details. The important thing is that it works." But as FlowPay evolved from concept to working prototype, Brandon's behavior began to change. He started scheduling alignment meetings, where he'd grill me on technical decisions, not to understand them, but to find ways to insert himself into the narrative. He'd take notes furiously. Then I'd hear him parroting my explanations verbatim in investor calls, always careful to use I instead of we, and never mentioning the engineering team at all. The first major red flag came 6 months into development. We were preparing for a demo at the Regional FinTech Summit, a smaller conference but important for getting early feedback from industry insiders. I'd spent weeks preparing a technical presentation that walked through our architecture and demonstrated the live system processing thousands of transactions in real time. The night before the conference, Brandon called me into his office. "Sarah, I've been thinking, your presentation is very technical, maybe too technical for this audience. Why don't you let me handle the demo? You can be there to answer any deep dive questions if they come up." I pushed back. "Brandon, this is a room full of CTOs and payment system architects. They want to see the technical details. That's the whole point of this conference." His jaw tightened. "I'm not suggesting we hide the technical details. I'm saying the presentation needs to tell a story, and I'm better at that than you are. This is about selling the vision, not just showing off code." In the end, we compromised. I would do the technical walkthrough, and Brandon would handle the intro and conclusion. But when we got on stage, Brandon's introduction stretched from 5 minutes to 15. He walked through his innovations in payment processing, described his breakthrough in understanding user needs, and positioned himself as the technical visionary who'd cracked the code that had stumped the industry for years. By the time he handed over to me, the audience was checking their phones, and my time had been cut in half. I made the best of it, racing through the technical demonstration and managing to wow the audience with the live transaction processing. The questions afterwards were all directed at me, much to Brandon's visible annoyance. Several CTOs approached me during the networking session, eager to discuss the algorithm design and security architecture. One of them, Rachel Kim from a major payment processor, pulled me aside. "That's remarkable work. Sarah, I have to ask how much of the core architecture is yours." I hesitated, still clinging to startup loyalty. "It's a team effort. Brandon set the vision, and we executed on it. Rachel gave me a knowing look. I've been in this industry for 20 years. I know innovative architecture when I see it, and I know who's capable of building it. Just make sure you're protecting your work. Her words stuck with me on the flight home. Protecting my work. What did that even mean in the context of a startup where we were all supposed to be rowing in the same direction? But as the plane descended into Dunwich, I made a decision that would later save my career. I would start documenting everything meticulously. Every design decision, every algorithm, every innovation, all with timestamps and version control, just in case. The documentation habit turned out to be fortuitous for another reason. 3 weeks after the conference, I was visiting my ex-husband David to pick up some old furniture he'd been storing for me. Despite our divorce 2 years earlier, we'd managed to maintain a cordial relationship, partly because we'd never had kids to complicate things, and partly because David was genuinely a decent person we'd just grown apart. David worked as an intellectual property attorney at LexPoint Advisors, specializing in technology patents. As he helped me load boxes into my car, he noticed the FlowPay logo on my laptop bag. Virelia Systems. That's the hot payment startup, right? I think we've done some trademark work for them. Yeah, I'm leading the core platform development, I said, trying to keep the pride out of my voice. Leading it. So you're building their secret sauce. He paused, studying my face with the same expression he used to get when he sensed I was downplaying my achievements. Sarah, please tell me you have good IP assignment clauses in your contract. I mumbled something about standard employment agreements, but David wasn't satisfied. Over coffee in his kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd once planned our future together, he walked me through the basics of intellectual property law in the startup world. Look, I'm not saying Virelia is going to screw you over, he said, pulling up some documents on his laptop. But I've seen too many talented engineers get pushed out once their work is done, only to watch founders claim credit for everything. The standard employment agreement assigns all work to the company, but there are exceptions. Work done on your own time, using your own resources, especially if it builds on your prior knowledge. David, I can't patent FlowPay. It belongs to Virelia. I'm not talking about patenting FlowPay itself, but the core algorithms, the security architecture, the novel approaches you're developing. Those might be yours, depending on the specifics. At minimum, you should document your contributions clearly. Better yet, he hesitated, then pulled up a patent application form. File provisional patents on your key innovations. It's cheap. It establishes priority date, and it might save you later. I left David's house with a flash drive full of patent templates and a growing unease in my stomach. Was I being paranoid? Was this just my ex-husband's lawyer brain seeing threats everywhere? But as I drove home, I thought about Brandon's increasing tendency to use I when describing our work, about Rachel Kim's warning, about the way Brandon had marginalized me at the conference. That night, I started writing my first patent application. The process was more complex than I'd anticipated. David had offered to help, but I wanted to keep him at arm's length. Mixing business with an ex felt like a recipe for disaster. Instead, I spent my evenings and weekends translating my technical innovations into the precise legal language required for patents. The method and system for parallel transaction processing with dynamic security layering was my first, covering the core algorithm that made FlowPay possible. The biometric authentication system resistant to AI-based spoofing was my second, protecting the security innovation I was most proud of. I filed them quietly, using my personal email and home address, paying the fees from my own pocket, according to the employment agreement I'd actually read after David's warning. Innovations developed using significant personal time and resources, and building substantially on pre-existing personal expertise, might not automatically belong to the company. It was a gray area, but I was careful to do all patent work at home, to base the applications on algorithms I'd conceptualized before joining Virelia, and to focus on the foundational technologies rather than FlowPay's specific implementation. Meanwhile, at Virelia, things were accelerating. We'd completed our alpha version and were onboarding our first beta customers, small merchants willing to test unproven payment technology in exchange for rock-bottom transaction fees. The results were spectacular. Transaction times were 94% faster than traditional processors. Fraud detection caught 99.7% of test attacks while maintaining a false positive rate below 0.1%. The system scaled smoothly from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of transactions without breaking a sweat. Brandon was in his element, talking to press, wooing investors, painting a picture of a future where FlowPay would make traditional payment processors obsolete. The engineering team was growing too. We'd hired 6 more developers and a dedicated DevOps team. But with growth came politics, and the politics were about to get ugly. It started with Tyler Morrison. Brandon introduced Tyler at an all-hands meeting on a rainy Thursday in November. Nearly a year after I'd joined Virelia, Tyler would be our new VP of Engineering, Brandon announced, bringing seasoned leadership and strategic vision to our technical team. I sat in the back row, trying to keep my expression neutral as Brandon praised Tyler's track record of scaling engineering organizations and aligning technical execution with business objectives. What Brandon didn't mention was that Tyler's last startup had failed spectacularly, burning through $30 million in funding without ever shipping a working product, or that Tyler and Brandon had been college roommates and had tried to start that failed company together, or that Tyler's actual technical experience was limited to managing offshore development teams who built cookie-cutter mobile apps. Marcus found me in my office after the meeting, his face tight with barely controlled anger. "Did you know about this?" "First, I'm hearing of it," I admitted. "I thought you were happy as head of engineering." I was, apparently. Brandon thinks we need more strategic leadership. He made air quotes around the words, his disgust evident. Tyler's calendaring one-on-ones with everyone on the team, including you. My meeting with Tyler was scheduled for the next morning. He showed up 15 minutes late, designer coffee in hand, and spent the first 10 minutes name-dropping Silicon Valley luminaries he claimed to know personally. When we finally got around to discussing FlowPay, it became clear he'd done minimal homework on what we'd actually built. "So, Sarah," he said, leaning back in his chair with studied casualness, "Brandon tells me you've been doing good work on the payment processing stuff. Walk me through the architecture." I gave him the high-level overview, watching his eyes glaze over when I got into the technical details. He perked up only when I mentioned our performance metrics. 94% faster. That's impressive. How much of that is from using standard optimization techniques versus novel approaches? It was a loaded question, designed to minimize my contributions. The performance gains come entirely from the novel parallel processing algorithm. Standard optimizations might give you 10, maybe 20% improvement. We're in a different league entirely. Tyler made a note on his tablet. "Interesting. And this algorithm, it's fully documented. Other engineers could maintain and extend it." "Of course, we have comprehensive documentation, although the core concepts require pretty deep expertise in distributed systems to fully understand." Another note. "You know, Sarah, as we scale, we need to think about making our systems more accessible to average engineers. Not everyone can be a technical superstar. Part of good architecture is making things simple enough that anyone can work on them." I bit back my first response, and my second. Finally, I managed. Payment processing at scale isn't simple. Pretending otherwise is how you end up with security breaches and lost transactions. Tyler smiled the way you might smile at a child who insists monsters are real. "Of course, I'm just thinking ahead to when we're a 1,000-person company. We can't have systems that only one person understands." The meeting went downhill from there. Tyler questioned every architectural decision, suggested simplifications that would have crippled performance, and generally made it clear he saw me as an obstacle to his vision of a nice, simple, offshore maintainable codebase. When he finally left, I had a tension headache and a growing certainty that my time at Virelia was about to get much harder. I was right. Over the next few weeks, Tyler systematically inserted himself into every aspect of FlowPay development. He restructured the engineering team, creating new layers of management and pushing Marcus into a diminished role. He hired a technical architect named Kevin, who'd worked with him before, a yes man whose main skill seemed to be regurgitating Tyler's opinions with more technical-sounding words. But the real betrayal came when Tyler started holding architecture review sessions, where I had to present my work to him and Kevin for approval. In the first session, I walked through the transaction processing algorithm, complete with performance benchmarks and mathematical proofs of correctness. Tyler stopped me halfway through. "This is very complex. Sarah, Kevin, what's your take?" Kevin cleared his throat importantly. "Well, it seems like we're over-engineering here. I've built payment systems before, and they didn't need anything this complicated. Maybe we should consider using more standard approaches." "The standard approaches can't meet our performance requirements," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I've shown you the benchmarks." "Benchmarks can be misleading," Tyler interrupted. "What matters is maintainability and time to market. Brandon wants us to accelerate our launch timeline. We can't do that if we're building rocket ships when a bicycle would do." I looked around the conference room at the whiteboards covered with my diagrams, at the monitors showing our system processing thousands of transactions per second, at Tyler's smug face and Kevin's vacant nod of agreement. "A bicycle can't fly," I said quietly. "If you want FlowPay to be just another payment processor, then sure, let's use standard approaches, but I thought we were trying to revolutionize the industry." Tyler's face darkened. "No one's questioning our ambitions, Sarah. But there's a difference between innovation and unnecessarily complex engineering. I'm going to need you to document some alternative approaches. Simpler ones. We'll make a decision based on what's best for the company." I spent the next week creating dumbed-down versions of my algorithms, each one progressively worse than the last. I showed how we'd lose the parallel processing capabilities, how security would be compromised, how performance would degrade to industry-standard levels. I thought I was making a point about the necessity of sophisticated engineering for ambitious goals. Instead, Tyler thanked me for being collaborative and announced that Kevin would be taking over the core platform development to implement a hybrid approach that balanced my theoretical innovations with practical engineering realities. I was reassigned to work on peripheral systems integration, basically, building API connectors to legacy banking systems, the kind of work any competent developer could do in their sleep. Marcus resigned the next day. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, cleaning out his desk. "I brought you here to build something amazing, and now I can't watch them destroy your work, and I won't be party to what's coming next." "What's coming next?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Marcus glanced around, then leaned in close. "Tyler's been having Kevin reverse engineer your code. They're planning to rebuild it with offshore teams once they understand how it works. Brandon thinks you're too expensive and too difficult to manage. They just need to extract your knowledge first." The rage that flooded through me was white-hot and clarifying. I'd poured my expertise, my creativity, my nights and weekends into building something extraordinary, and now they were going to steal it, simplify it, and probably break it in the process. But worse than the technical vandalism was the personal betrayal. I'd trusted Brandon, believed in the vision he'd sold me, worked myself to exhaustion to make his company successful, and this was my reward. That night, I called David. "I need your help," I said without preamble. "The patents I filed, what's their status?" "Sarah, what's wrong?" The concern in his voice almost broke through my composure. Can you check, please?" I heard typing, then a pause. "Your first two were approved last month. The provisional for the third is still pending. Sarah, what's happening?" I told him everything. The words poured out in a furious torrent: Tyler's arrival, the marginalization, the reverse engineering, Marcus's warning. David listened without interrupting, though I could hear his breathing getting heavier as his own anger built. "Those bastards," he said when I finally ran out of words. "Okay, listen to me. Document everything, every email, every meeting, every line of code they're having you explain. Forward it all to a personal account. And Sarah, start looking at your employment agreement again. If they're planning to push you out, we need to know exactly what your rights are. Over the next 3 weeks, I became an actress worthy of an Oscar. I showed up to work, smiled at Tyler, patiently explained my code to Kevin, and built API connectors with mechanical precision. I attended meetings where Brandon talked about FlowPay's bright future without ever mentioning my name. I watched Kevin's pathetic attempts to understand and replicate my algorithms, occasionally offering helpful suggestions that sent him down rabbit holes of complexity. And I documented everything. Email threads where Tyler questioned the need for my security innovations. Meeting notes where Brandon claimed credit for architectural decisions I'd made. Version control logs showing Kevin's ham-fisted modifications breaking core functionality. Screenshots of internal presentations where my work was described as team efforts or company innovations. The end came on a Friday afternoon in early December. Tyler called me into a conference room where Brandon was already waiting, wearing his best sympathetic face. HR was there too, Sandra, who'd always been friendly but now wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah, Brandon began, this isn't easy for any of us. You've done some good work here, but we've reached a point where we need different skills on the team. The company is evolving, and frankly, your style isn't meshing well with where we're headed. My style. I kept my voice carefully neutral. Tyler jumped in. You're brilliant. No one's questioning that. But you're not a team player. You resist feedback. You over-engineer solutions. And honestly, your attitude has become a problem. Several team members have complained. Which team members? I asked, though I knew he wouldn't answer. That's not important, Brandon said smoothly. What matters is that this isn't working out. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package, 3 months' salary, continued health insurance through the end of the year, and a positive reference for your next role. In exchange, we'll need you to sign this separation agreement. Sandra slid a document across the table. I didn't need to read it to know it would include non-compete clauses, non-disclosure agreements, and most importantly, confirmation that all my work belonged to Veralia Systems. I'll need to review this with my lawyer, I said. Brandon's sympathetic mask slipped for just a moment. Of course, but we'll need an answer by Monday. And Sarah, this offer is contingent on a smooth transition. We'll need you to do a complete knowledge transfer to Kevin over the next 2 weeks. And if I refuse, then we'll terminate you for cause, effective immediately, no severance, no reference, and will enforce all the restrictive covenants in your employment agreement. His smile was sharp now, all pretense of sympathy gone. Your choice. I stood up slowly, gathering my dignity around me like armor. I'll let you know on Monday. The walk to my desk felt endless. My colleagues avoided eye contact. They knew what had just happened. Only Kira, one of the junior developers I'd mentored, met my gaze. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," and quickly looked away when Tyler emerged from the conference room. I packed my personal items under Tyler's watchful eye. He even checked my bag to make sure I wasn't taking any company property. The humiliation burned, but I held my head high. They could take my job, but they couldn't take my knowledge, my patents, or my self-respect. That weekend, I met with David and 2 of his colleagues who specialized in employment law and intellectual property disputes. We dissected every document, every email, every line of my employment agreement. The news was mixed but hopeful. The non-compete is probably enforceable in Nevada, one lawyer explained, but only for directly competitive products. You could work on payment systems, just not ones that directly compete with FlowPay. The IP assignment is trickier. Your employment agreement has standard language, but there's an exception for inventions created outside work hours using personal resources. How do we prove that? I asked. David pulled up my patent filings. Timestamps show you filed these outside work hours. The provisional applications reference algorithms you published in academic papers before joining Veralia. And most importantly, the patents were granted to you personally, not the company. If FlowPay uses these patented methods, it does, I confirmed. The entire core architecture is built on them. The lawyers exchanged glances. Then Veralia Systems might be infringing on your patents. I spent Sunday crafting my response. not the knowledge transfer they wanted, but something far more valuable, a clear articulation of which parts of FlowPay were built on my patented innovations. I was careful, precise, and devastatingly thorough. By the time I was done, I had a document that would make any competent lawyer salivate. On Monday morning, I walked into Varelia for what I knew would be the last time. Tyler was waiting in the lobby, clearly expecting me to either capitulate or explode. I did neither. "I've reviewed the separation agreement," I said calmly. "I'm declining your offer." His face went through several expressions before settling on contempt. "Then you're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." "Of course. Oh, Tyler." I pulled out an envelope. "This is for Brandon, and you might want to have legal review it before you do anything with FlowPay." Security walked me to the parking garage, but I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt free. And more importantly, I felt the first stirrings of something that had been missing for months' hope. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. True to their word, Varelia terminated me for cause, which meant no severance and no healthcare continuation. They also immediately filed to enforce the non-compete, sending cease and desist letters when I updated my LinkedIn to show I was looking for new opportunities. But I had David and his team on my side, and they were very, very good at their jobs. The first shot across Varelia's bow came in the form of a letter to their board of directors, copied to all major investors. It laid out, in excruciating detail, how FlowPay's core technology relied on patents owned by me personally. It included code comparisons, architectural diagrams, and a helpful timeline showing when I'd filed the patents versus when the technology appeared in FlowPay. The letter concluded with a polite notice that any commercial use of my patented methods would require a licensing agreement. The response was immediate and panicked. Brandon called my personal cell 6 times before I blocked his number. Tyler sent increasingly desperate emails that ranged from threatening to pleading. But the most interesting reaction came from an unexpected source, Jennifer Walsh, Varelia's lead board member and managing partner at North Axis Capital. "Ms. Mitchell," she said when I finally took her call, "I think we should meet, without Brandon or Tyler present." We met at a discreet hotel bar downtown, the kind of place where million-dollar deals were whispered over martinis. Jennifer was everything I'd expected: sharp, direct, and utterly focused on protecting her investment. "I've reviewed your patents," she said without preamble, "and I've had our technical advisors analyze FlowPay's architecture. Your claims appear to have merit." "They're not claims," I corrected. "They're facts. Every transaction FlowPay processes uses my innovations: the parallel processing algorithm, the security layers, the fraud detection system. It's all built on my patents." Jennifer sipped her wine thoughtfully. "Brandon assured us the technology was developed entirely in-house." "It was, by me, in my house, on my time." I pulled out a folder of documentation. "Here's the development timeline. You'll notice I filed the provisional patents before implementing similar features in FlowPay. The final patents were granted before I was terminated." She reviewed the documents with the kind of attention that made her reputation as one of Silicon Valley's shrewdest investors. "What do you want, Ms. Mitchell?" "Originally, I wanted to build something revolutionary. I wanted to be part of a team that changed how the world handles money. But your CEO and his friend decided I was too expensive and too difficult." I met her gaze steadily. "Now I want justice and compensation." "What kind of compensation?" "Licensing fees for every transaction FlowPay has processed using my technology, ongoing royalties for future use, and public acknowledgement of my contributions." I paused. "Or Varelia can try to rebuild FlowPay without my patents. Good luck with that." Jennifer's poker face finally cracked. "You know that would kill the company. We're in the middle of raising our Series B." "I'm aware." I'd done my homework. Varelia was trying to raise $50 million at a $200 million valuation, with FlowPay as their crown jewel. Without my technology, they had a pretty UI and not much else. "I need to discuss this with the board," Jennifer said finally. "But Ms. Mitchell?" "Off the record, Brandon may have made a very expensive mistake. Word of the patent dispute leaked within days, probably from someone on Verelia's board trying to pressure Brandon. TechCrunch ran a story. Payment startup Verelia Systems faces patent challenge from former engineer. The article was carefully neutral, but the implications were clear. FlowPay might be built on stolen technology. The Series B round went into immediate jeopardy. Greenbridge Ventures, who'd been leading the round, announced they were reassessing their position. Other investors followed suit. Verelia's valuation, built on the promise of revolutionary payment technology, started looking as shaky as a house of cards in a windstorm. Inside Verelia, according to Kira, who courageously kept me informed, chaos reigned. Kevin had been trying to modify the core algorithm to avoid my patents, but every change broke something else. Performance degraded. Security vulnerabilities appeared. The beautiful, elegant system I'd built was being butchered by people who didn't understand its underlying principles. Brandon, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. He gave interviews claiming the patent dispute was a misunderstanding and that Verelia's technology was independently developed. He even had the audacity to suggest I was a disgruntled former employee trying to cash in on the company's success. That's when I decided to go nuclear. I still had connections in the fintech world, people who respected my work and trusted my integrity. I started giving technical talks at small conferences and meetups, ostensibly about innovations in payment processing, but really demonstrating the elegance of my patented algorithms. I never mentioned Verelia directly, but anyone with half a brain could connect the dots. The most damaging presentation came at the Bay Area FinTech Developers Meetup, an informal gathering that nonetheless included CTOs and architects from major financial institutions. I walked through the technical details of my patents, showing not just what they did, but why they were revolutionary. I explained the mathematical proofs, the performance characteristics, the security implications. By the end, the audience understood that whoever controlled these patents controlled the future of real-time payment processing. During the Q&A, someone asked the question I'd been waiting for, "Aren't these the same innovations FlowPay is using?" I smiled. I couldn't say. I'm no longer with Verelia Systems, but my patents are public record, and anyone can compare them to FlowPay's architecture. Due diligence is so important in fintech, don't you think? The video of that talk went viral in fintech circles. Within 48 hours, I had 3 job offers and 2 acquisition proposals for my patents. But more importantly, Verelia's potential enterprise customers started asking hard questions. If FlowPay was built on disputed technology, what happened to their payment infrastructure if Verelia lost the patent fight? Jennifer Walsh called again, this time with barely concealed urgency. The board has met. We're prepared to discuss terms. But Brandon wasn't ready to give up. He hired Brenmore Legal, a heavyweight firm known for crushing patent disputes through sheer resource advantage. Their strategy was predictable: challenge the validity of my patents, claim that my work at Verelia was done for hire despite the timing, and bury me in legal fees until I gave up. They didn't count on 2 things. First, David's firm took my case on contingency, believing in both the merits and the potential payout. Second, and more importantly, they didn't count on Tyler Morrison developing a conscience. It happened on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into the legal battle. I was reviewing depositions when my phone rang with a blocked number. "Sarah, it's Tyler. Don't hang up." I almost did anyway, but something in his voice stopped me. He sounded broken. "What do you want, Tyler?" "To apologize, and to help, if you'll let me." We met at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one from the tech scene would ever go. Tyler looked terrible bags under his eyes, nervous tics I'd never seen before. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately started talking. "I knew it was wrong, from the beginning. I knew. Brandon brought me in specifically to push you out. He said you were too powerful, too independent. He couldn't control you, and he couldn't stand that the company's success depended on someone he couldn't manipulate. Why are you telling me this now?" I kept my voice neutral, though inside I was recording every word on my phone. "Because it's destroying the company," And because, he rubbed his face, because I've been where you are. Brandon did the same thing to me at our last startup, built it on my ideas, then forced me out when I challenged him. I thought this time would be different, that I'd be on the inside, but I'm just another tool to him. Tyler reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. Everything's on here. Emails where Brandon explicitly talks about stealing your work, messages about hiding the patent infringement, even recordings of meetings where he laughed about how you were too naive to see it coming. I stared at the drive. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Have your lawyers verify everything. But Sarah, I'm not cut out for this. I'm resigning tomorrow. I wanted to do one right thing before I left. He slid out of the booth and paused. For what it's worth, FlowPay was brilliant. Kevin's destroyed it trying to work around your patents. The whole thing's falling apart. Then he was gone, leaving me with a USB drive that might change everything. David's team verified the contents within 24 hours. The evidence was damning a clear pattern of deliberate infringement, conspiracy to defraud, and enough corporate malfeasance to make Verelia's board personally liable if they didn't act. Jennifer Walsh called an emergency board meeting that Friday. According to later reports, it was brutal. Brandon tried to deny everything, then pivoted to claiming I'd stolen from the company, then finally resorted to blaming Tyler for mismanaging the situation. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the board had a fiduciary duty to protect shareholder value. Brandon Hughes was terminated as CEO of Verelia Systems at 3:47 p.m. on December 18th. The board issued a carefully worded statement about leadership transitions and strategic realignment, but everyone in the valley knew what had really happened. The founder had been ousted for trying to steal from his own engineer. But my victory wasn't complete yet. Verelia still existed, still had my technology at its core, and still owed me for every transaction they'd processed. The new interim CEO, Jennifer Walsh herself, called me the next day. "Let's end this," she said simply. "What will it take?" I was ready with my terms. A one-time payment of $8.5 million for past infringement, ongoing royalties of 3% of gross transaction revenue, public acknowledgement of my role in creating FlowPay's core technology, and a seat on Verelia's technical advisory board to ensure my innovations were properly maintained and evolved. "That's substantial," Jennifer said. "It's fair," I countered. "Without my patents, FlowPay is worthless. With them, properly licensed, you can still build the company you envisioned, your choice." It took another week of negotiations, but in the end, Verelia had no real options. The announcement went out on December 30th. Verelia Systems announces strategic patent licensing agreement with Sarah Mitchell, inventor of core FlowPay technologies. The $8.5 million hit my account on January 2nd. But money wasn't the only thing I gained from the experience. The tech world had taken notice. Here was an engineer who'd not only built revolutionary technology, but had the foresight to protect it and the courage to fight for it. The job offers rolled in from every major tech company. But I had different plans. Cypher Bridge Labs incorporated on January 15th, with me as founder and CEO. Our mission was simple: build the most secure, efficient payment infrastructure in the world, and license it fairly to anyone who wanted to revolutionize financial services. No stealing, no backstabbing, no politics, just great technology solving real problems. David helped set up the corporate structure, making sure every innovation would be properly protected. Some of my former colleagues from Verelia, including Dimitri and Priya, joined as co-founders. Even Kira, the junior developer who'd secretly supported me, became our first employee. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when our first major licensing deal came from a consortium of banks looking to upgrade their ancient payment systems. The technology they licensed was an evolved version of what I'd built for FlowPay, improved and refined without the constraints of startup politics. The deal was worth $50 million over 5 years. Brandon Hughes tried to resurface a year later with a new startup, claiming he'd learned from his mistakes and was now focused on ethical entrepreneurship. The venture capital community's response was telling. Not a single major firm would take his calls. Last I heard, He was working as a consultant, which in Silicon Valley speak meant he was unemployed and unemployable. Tyler Morrison reached out once, 6 months after everything settled. He'd taken a job as a project manager at a nonprofit, finally free from the startup world that had corrupted him. His email was brief. "I'm glad you won. You deserve to." I didn't respond, but I appreciated the closure. Varelia Systems survived, barely. Under Jennifer's leadership, and with my technology properly licensed, they pivoted to focus on enterprise payment solutions. They never achieved the unicorn valuation Brandon had dreamed of, but they built a solid, profitable business. Kevin was quietly let go, replaced by engineers who actually understood the technology they were working with. As for me, Cypherbridge Labs grew steadily, thoughtfully, the way real technology companies should. We hired slowly, picking engineers who valued innovation over ego. We filed patents regularly, but also contributed to open-source projects and published papers advancing the field. We became known not just for our technology, but for our culture, a place where brilliant engineers could do their best work without fear of politics or betrayal. 3 years later, I was invited to give the keynote at the Global FinTech Summit, the industry's most prestigious conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of thousands, I thought about Brandon's introduction at that regional conference years earlier. He'd talked about vision and disruption and changing the world, but he'd never understood the truth. Real innovation comes from the engineers in the trenches, the ones who turn impossible problems into elegant solutions. The future of financial technology, I told the audience, belongs to those who build it, not those who just talk about it. Protect your work, value your contributions, and never let anyone convince you that your innovations are worth less than your silence. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Later that evening, at the conference gala, Rachel Kim found me at the bar. She'd moved up in the world too, now serving as CTO of a major payment processor. "I'm glad you protected your work," she said, echoing her words from that first conference. "The industry's better for it." I raised my glass to protecting what we build, and to those brave enough to build it. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Brandon had been different, if he'd valued collaboration over control, if he'd seen me as a partner rather than a threat. Varelia could have been the unicorn he dreamed of. FlowPay could have transformed global finance with me helping to guide its evolution. But that's not who Brandon was. He was a taker, not a builder, and in the end, that's why he lost everything while I gained not just wealth, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that I'd stood up for myself, protected my work, and proven that sometimes the engineers really do inherit the earth. The patent plaques hang on my office wall at Cypherbridge Labs, not as trophies, but as reminders. Below them, I framed a printout of Brandon's last email to me before the lawyers got involved. "You'll never work in this industry again." Every time I sign a new licensing deal, every time we ship a new innovation, every time another brilliant engineer joins our team, I think of those words and smile. He was wrong about so many things, but most of all, he was wrong about me.